So what happened last time was quite interesting. Tahireh is one of those, the only female part of those 19 people that believed in Bab initially. And he was married to the son of the biggest ecclesiastical doctor in Qazvin. That guy, his actually husband was his cousin too, because the father of Tahireh was brother of this particular person. So this was a very prestigious religious family. What ended up happening is that the story started where somebody that was a sheikhi goes and sees that this particular doctor of religion and leader of the religion in Qazvin was saying bad things about Sheikh Ahmad Ahsa'i, which was part of the Sheikhi movement. So he goes during the Friday prayer, he goes into the mosque and cut the guy's throat. So what ends up happening, so he kills the father-in-law of Tahireh. And of course, this was an uproar, and this guy was a sheikh, so he escapes. And what ended up happening is because they were against Bab'is and Baha'is, Bab'is at the time, so they incarcerated many of the prominent Babi people and accused them of killing basically this prominent person, Imam Jomeh, right? So while this thing was happening is that, and they moved these people to jail, and then they send them to Tehran for prosecution and so on and so forth. Meantime, the guy that perpetrated this crime really confessed and said, look, I'm not a Babi, and I'm a sheikhi, and this guy was saying bad things about my master, and I killed him. So they took him in also, and basically, and then he escapes. One of the, right, he escapes. So what ends up happening, they still don't release the Bab'is because he confessed and everything was. So they send them to Tehran, and then they told the Shah that these people created, and we need revenge. And ironically, they captured Tahireh also because her husband wanted to basically put her in jail, but he asked her to come back to him, and she said, no, I'm never going to come back. So what ended up happening is that the Shah writes a letter to this ecclesiastical structure in Qazvin that, look, even Ali, when they martyred Ali, he mentioned that if somebody kills me, only get revenge from the person who killed me, not his family or followers, and so on and so forth. So Shah writes this and send it to these doctors and say, look, just find the person who did this thing and then destroy that guy instead of incarcerating this many people that had nothing to do with this process. And what ended up happening is that they actually pick another Bab'i because they couldn't get hold of the person that did it, and executed that person in revenge. So they did this, and then say, okay, send those guys back. So publicly, those Bab'is from Tehran back to Qazvin, publicly we say that they confess that they weren't part of this scheme, and then we let them free so they can go back to their status. So Shah was stupid enough, and Mirza Aghasi, which was his chief magistrate, convinced Shah that, so no, send this back, and this is what's going to happen. Of course, his rival was doing this, Mirza Aghasi's rival. And Mirza Aghasi knew what's going to happen, but to eliminate his rival allowed him to do this. So that magistrate that was there sent these people back to Qazvin, all the Bab'is, and the minute they received in Qazvin, a few days later, mobs came in and killed them all. So they killed these innocent Bab'is, just revenge of that death, which had nothing to do with Bab'is to begin with. So that's where the story starts, and Tahirih was under incarceration, so Baha'u'llah from Tehran tries to manages to get her released from the prison, and because she was, I think, incarcerated in the Kalantar, or the right. And so now she escapes coming toward Tehran, and now the story starts where they're going to have a conference, which is one woman and 200 men getting to this conference. And this woman is part of those 19 original letters of living that were in charge of propagating the Holy Spirit, or Bab's message to the world.
Chapter 16. The Conference of BADASHT. Soon after Tahiri had started on her journey, Baha'u'llah instructed Arkei Kalim to complete the necessary preparations for his contemplated departure for Khorasan. He committed to his care his family and asked him to provide whatever might be conducive to their well-being and safety. When he arrived at Shahrud, he was met by Qudus, who had left Mashhad, where he had been residing, and had come to welcome him as soon as he had heard of his approach. The whole province of Khorasan was in those days in the throes of a violent agitation. The activities of Qudus and Mullah Hussein had initiated, their zeal, their courage, their outspoken language, had aroused the people from their lethargy, had kindled in the hearts of some the noblest sentiments of faith and devotion, and had provoked in the breasts of others the instincts of passionate fanaticism and malice. A multitude of seekers constantly poured from every direction into Mashhad, eagerly sought the residence of Mullah Hussein, and through him were ushered into the presence of Qudus. Their numbers soon swelled to such proportions as to excite the apprehension of the authorities. The chief constable viewed with concern and dismay the crowds of agitated people who streamed unceasingly into every quarter of that holy city. In his desire to assert his rights, intimidate Mullah Hussein, and induce him to curtail the scope of his activities, he issued orders to arrest immediately the latter's special attendant, whose name was Hassan, and subject him to cruel and shameful treatment. They pierced his nose, passed a cord through the incision, and with this halter led and paraded him through the streets. Mullah Hussein was in the presence of Qudus when the news of this disgraceful affliction that had befallen his servant reached him. Fearing lest this sad intelligence might grieve the heart of his beloved chief, he rose and quietly retired. His companions soon gathered round him, expressed their indignation at this outrageous assault upon so innocent a follower of their faith, and urged him to avenge the insult. Mullah Hussein tried to appease their anger. Let not, he pleaded, the indignity that has befallen Hassan afflict and disturb you, for Hussein is still with you and will safely deliver him back into your hands tomorrow. In the face of so solemn an assurance, his companions ventured no further remarks. Their hearts, however, burned with impatience to redress that bitter injury. A number of them eventually decided to band themselves together and loudly raise through the streets of Mashhad the cry of Ya Sahibuz Saman, which is, O Lord of the Age, one of the titles of the promised Qaim, as a protest against this sudden affront to the dignity of their faith. That cry was the first of its kind to be raised in Khorasan in the name of the cause of God. The city re-echoed with the sound of those voices. The reverberations of their shouts reached even the most outlying regions of the province, raised a great tumult in the hearts of the people, and were the signal for the tremendous happenings that were destined to transpire in the future. In the midst of the confusion that ensued, those who were holding the halter with which they dragged Hassan to the street perished by the sword. The companions of Mullah Hussein conducted the released captive into the presence of their leader and informed him of the fate that had befallen the oppressor. "You have refused," Mullah Hussein is reported to have remarked, "to tolerate the trials to which Hassan has been subjected. How can you reconcile yourselves to the martyrdom of Hussein?" A footnote here says allusion to his own martyrdom. The city of Mashhad, which had just recovered its peace and tranquility after the rebellion that the Salah had provoked, was plunged again into confusion and distress. Prince Hamzi Mirza was stationed with his men and munitions at a distance of 4 farsangs from the city, ready to face whatever emergency might arise when the news of these fresh disturbances suddenly reached him. He immediately dispatched a detachment to the city with instructions to obtain the assistance of the governor for the arrest of Mullah Hussein and to conduct him into his presence. Abdul Ali Khan Imaraghi, the captain of the prince's artillery, immediately intervened. "I deem myself," he pleaded, "one among the lovers and admirers of Mullah Hussein. If you contemplate inflicting any harm upon him, I pray you to take my life and then to proceed to execute your design. For I cannot, so long as I live, tolerate the least disrespect towards him." The prince, who knew full well how much he stood in need of that officer, was greatly embarrassed at this unexpected declaration. "I too have met Mullah Hussein," was his reply as he tried to remove the apprehension of Abdul Ali Khan. "I too cherish the utmost devotion to him. By summoning him to my camp, I am hoping to restrict the scope of the mischief which has been kindled and to safeguard his person." The prince then addressed in his own handwriting a letter to Mullah Hussein in which he urged the extreme desirability of his transferring his residence for a few days to his headquarters, and assured him of his sincere desire to shield him from the attacks of his infuriated opponents. He gave orders that his own highly ornamented tent be pitched in the vicinity of his camp and be reserved for the reception of his expected guest. On the receipt of this communication, Mullah Hussein presented it to Qudus, who advised him to respond to the invitation of the prince. "No harm can befall you," Qudus assured him. "As to me, I shall this very night set out in the company of Mirza Muhammad Ali Qazvini, one of the letters of the living, for Mazindaran. Please God, you too, later on, at the head of a large company of the faithful and preceded by the black standards, will depart from Mashhad and join me. We shall meet at whatever place the Almighty will have decreed."
What is the black standard?
That was the black flag that was in the prediction or prophecies.
Right. There is in a Shia prophecy that the 12th Imam would raise a black flag from Khorasan and crosses the country. So this is really a prophecy, and they were trying to enact that prophecy. So this was really announcement of the beginning of this new religion based on the Islamic prophecies. So they were trying to enact that, the black standards.
Mullah Hussein joyously responded. He threw himself at the feet of Qudus and assured him of his firm determination to discharge with fidelity the obligations which he had imposed upon him. Qudus lovingly took him in his arms and, kissing his eyes and his forehead, committed him to the Almighty's unfailing protection.
Remember, we read, for example, before that they went to the rescue of the Mullah Hussein's servant, and they basically destroyed those people that were dragging him through the streets. So at the time of Bab, this Islamic law of defending yourself against the enemies when you were attacked were not abrogated. So the story that we're reading, you have to realize that these people that's supposed to basically raise the black flag and go cross country announcing this new religion, they were all armed.
Early that same afternoon, Mullah Hussein mounted his steed and rode out with dignity and calm to the encampment of Prince Hamzi Mirza, and was ceremoniously conducted by Abdul Ali Khan, who, together with a number of officers, had been appointed by the prince to go out and welcome him to the tent that had been specially erected for his use. That very night, Qudus summoned to his presence Mirza Muhammad Baqir-i Qaini, who had built the Bab'i, together with a number of the most prominent among his companions, and enjoined upon them to bear unquestioned allegiance to Mullah Hussein and to obey implicitly whatever he might wish them to do. Tempestuous are the storms which lie ahead of us, he told them. The days of stress and violent commotion are fast approaching. Cleave to him, for in obedience to his command lies your salvation. With these words, Qudus bade farewell to his companions, and accompanied by Mirza Muhammad Ali-i Qazvini, departed from Mashhad. A few days later, he encountered Mirza Suleiman-i Nuri, who informed him of the circumstances attending the deliverance of Tahiri from her confinement in Qazvin, of her journey in the direction of Khorasan, and of Baha'u'llah's subsequent departure from the capital.
Remember, the Qazvin is near Tehran. So this is almost central space in Iran. Khorasan is the northeast of Iran. So after basically Tahiri was released, and they rescued her, Baha'u'llah, with Aghay Kalim, his brother, and with Baha'u'llah himself, they set out to go toward Khorasan. So those guys were coming in with the black flag. They were coming from Khorasan toward Tehran.
Mirza Suleiman, as well as Mirza Muhammad Ali, remained in the company of Qudus until their arrival at BADASHT. They reached that hamlet at the hour of dawn and found there assembled a large gathering of people whom they recognized as their fellow believers. They decided, however, to resume their journey and proceeded directly to CHIHRÍQ. As they were approaching the village, Mirza Suleiman, who was following at a distance behind them, encountered Muhammad-i Hanasab, who was on his way to BADASHT. In answer to his inquiry as to the object of that gathering, Mirza Suleiman was informed that Baha'u'llah and Tahiri had, a few days before, left CHIHRÍQ for that hamlet, that a large number of believers had already arrived from Isfahan, Qazvin, and other towns of Persia, and were waiting to accompany Baha'u'llah on his intended journey to Khorasan. Tell Mullah Ahmad-i Ibdal, who is now in BADASHT, Mirza Suleiman remarked, that this very morning a light has shone upon you, the radiance of which you have failed to recognize. A footnote here says, allusion to Qudus. No sooner had Baha'u'llah been informed by Muhammad-i Hanasab of the arrival of Qudus at CHIHRÍQ than he decided to join him. Attended by Mullah Muhammad-i Mu'allim-i Nuri, he set out on horseback that same evening for that village, and had returned with Qudus to BADASHT the next morning at the hour of sunrise. It was then the beginning of summer. Upon his arrival, Baha'u'llah rented 3 gardens, one of which he assigned exclusively to the use of Qudus, another he set apart for Tahiri and her servant, and reserved the third for himself. Those who had gathered in BADASHT were 81 in number, all of whom, from the time of their arrival to the day of their dispersion, were the guests of Baha'u'llah. Every day he revealed a tablet which Mirza Suleiman-i Nuri chanted in the presence of the assembled believers. Upon each he bestowed a new name. He himself was henceforth designated by the name of Baha. Upon the last letter of the living was conferred the appellation of Qudus, and to Qurratul Ain was given the title of Tahiri. To each of those who had convened at BADASHT, a special tablet was subsequently revealed by the Bab, each of whom he addressed by the name recently conferred upon him. Later, at a time when a number of the more rigid and conservative among her fellow disciples chose to accuse Tahiri of indiscreetly rejecting the time-honored traditions of the past, the Bab, to whom these complaints had been addressed, replied in the following terms: "What am I to say regarding her whom the tongue of power and glory has named Tahiri, which is the pure one?"
Okay, so let's stop here. So this is really a climax of really true announcement of a separate religion. This was Conference of BADASHT, and it was really purposely orchestrated by Baha'u'llah and created 3 separate camps for himself, Qudus, and Tahir. And you have 3 places that are designated, and people are dribbling into that area. Remember, Tahir was the most vocal one in this group of the 19 huruf Baha'i, which disciples of the Bab, and obviously she was violating, quote unquote, traditional Islamic laws, because she was outspoken and she would challenge actually the ecclesiastical's order all the time. Remember, from the time she came from Karbala all the way to Hamadan and Isfahan and so on and so forth, everywhere that she went was creating a school, and she was teaching and so on and so forth, and people would gather around her. So, ironically, the first thing, again, to separate the old religion from the new religion, Baha'u'llah renamed actually those people that were supposed to be the actors of getting this new plan or this announcement to be presented. So the first thing he did is renamed the person as this Qurratul Ain, which was as Tahir. Tahir means the pure one. So they were saying that regardless of what she does, she is the pure one. So whatever she does is correct. And when they complained, they read a letter from the Bab about Tahir, because they were complaining to him so much that they said, "Who am I to basically refute what Baha'u'llah, which is tongue of power, has named this person?" So it's just quite interesting from that aspect of the scenario that was forming, which was orchestrated by Baha'u'llah for this conference of announcing a new religion. George, you want to read next?
But one thing I want to say was, notice how this is pretty much the first declaration that Baha'u'llah is him whom God shall make manifest, because he defers to Baha'u'llah, wouldn't even consider saying to Baha'u'llah, "What did you do?"
Right. That's a good observation.
Each day of that memorable gathering witnessed the abrogation of a new law and the repudiation of a long-established tradition. The veils that guarded the sanctity of the ordinances of Islam were sternly rent asunder, and the idols that had so long claimed the adoration of their blind worshippers were rudely demolished. No one knew, however, the source whence these bold and defiant innovations proceeded. No one suspected the hand which steadily and unerringly steered their course. Even the identity of him who had bestowed a new name upon each of those who had congregated in that hamlet remained unknown to those who had received them. Each conjectured according to his own degree of understanding. Few, if any, dimly surmised that Baha'u'llah was the author of the far-reaching changes which were being so fearlessly introduced. Sheikh Abu Turab, one of the best informed as to the nature of the developments in BADASHT, is reported to have related the following incident. Illness one day confined Baha'u'llah to his bed. Qudus, as soon as he heard of his indisposition, hastened to visit him. He seated himself when ushered into his presence on the right hand of Baha'u'llah. The rest of the companions were gradually admitted to his presence and grouped themselves around him. No sooner had they assembled than Muhammad Hassan-i Qazvini, the messenger of Tahiri, upon whom the name of Fatal Qazvini had been newly conferred, suddenly came in and conveyed to Qudus a pressing invitation from Tahiri to visit her in her own garden. "I have severed myself entirely from her," he boldly and decisively replied. "I refuse to meet her." A footnote here says, according to the Kashful Ghita, a decision had been previously arrived at between Qudus and Tahiri, in accordance with which the latter was to proclaim publicly the independent character of the revelation of the Bab, and to emphasize the abrogation of the laws and ordinances of the previous dispensation. Qudus, on the other hand, was expected to oppose her contention and strenuously to reject her views. This arrangement was made for the purpose of mitigating the effects of such a challenging and far-reaching proclamation, and of averting the dangers and perils which such a startling innovation was sure to produce. It says here that it is a quote from page 212. Baha'u'llah appears to have taken a neutral attitude in this controversy, though actually he was the prime mover and the controlling and directing influence throughout the different stages of that memorable episode. The messenger retired immediately, and soon returned, reiterating the same message and appealing to him to heed her urgent call. "She insists on your visit," were his words. "If you persist in your refusal, she herself will come to you." Perceiving his unyielding attitude, the messenger unsheathed his sword, laid it at the feet of Qudus, and said, "I refuse to go without you. Either accompany me to the presence of Tahiri, or cut off my head with this sword." "I have already declared my intention not to visit Tahiri," Qudus angrily retorted. "I am willing to comply with the alternative which you have chosen to put before me." Muhammad Hassan, who had seated himself at the feet of Qudus, had stretched forth his neck to receive the fatal blow, and suddenly the figure of Tahiri, adorned and unveiled, appeared before the eyes of the assembled companions. Consternation immediately seized the entire gathering. All stood aghast before this sudden and most unexpected apparition. To behold her face unveiled was to them inconceivable. Even to gaze at her shadow was a thing which they deemed improper, inasmuch as they regarded her as the very incarnation of Fatimi, the noblest emblem of chastity in their eyes. A footnote here says of Fatimi, the daughter of Muhammad and wife of the Imam Ali. Quietly, silently, and with the utmost dignity, Tahiri stepped forward and, advancing towards Qudus, seated herself on his right-hand side. Her unruffled serenity sharply contrasted with the affrighted countenances of those who were gazing upon her face. Fear, anger, and bewilderment stirred the depths of their souls. That sudden revelation seemed to have stunned their faculties. Abdul Khaliq-i-Isfahani was so gravely shaken that he cut his throat with his own hands. Covered with blood and shrieking with excitement, he fled away from the face of Tahiri. The few, following his example, abandoned their companions and forsook their faith. A number were seen standing speechless before her, confounded with wonder. Qudus, meanwhile, had remained seated in his place, holding the unsheathed sword in his hand, his face betraying a feeling of inexpressible anger. It seemed as if he were waiting for the moment when he could strike his fatal blow at Tahiri. His threatening attitude failed, however, to move her. Her countenance displayed that same dignity and confidence which she had evinced at the first moment of her appearance before the assembled believers. A feeling of joy and triumph had now illumined her face. She rose from her seat and, undeterred by the tumult that she had raised in the hearts of her companions, began to address the remnant of that assembly. Without the least premeditation, and in language that bore a striking resemblance to that of the Koran, she delivered her appeal with matchless eloquence and profound fervor. She concluded her address with this verse from the Koran: "Verily, amid gardens and rivers shall the pious dwell in the seat of truth, in the presence of the potent king." As she uttered these words, she cast a furtive glance towards both Baha'u'llah and Qudus in such a manner that those who were watching her were unable to tell to which of the two she was alluding. Immediately after, she declared, "I am the word which the Qa'im is to utter, the word which shall put to flight the chiefs and nobles of the earth." She then turned her face towards Qudus and rebuked him for having failed to perform in Khorasan those things which she deemed essential to the welfare of the faith. I am free to follow the promptings of my own conscience, retorted Qudus. I am not subject to the will and pleasure of my fellow disciples. Turning away her eyes from him, Tahiri invited those who were present to celebrate befittingly this great occasion. This day is the day of festivity and universal rejoicing, she added, the day on which the fetters of the past are burst asunder. Let those who have shared in this great achievement arise and embrace each other. That memorable day, and those which immediately followed it, witnessed the most revolutionary changes in the life and habits of the assembled followers of the Bab. Their manner of worship underwent a sudden and fundamental transformation.
Okay, so here, obviously the scenario was that Baha'u'llah was not feeling well. Qudus went to his visit him, and of course these were different camps of supposedly Qudus being the most basically orthodox of the religion, and Tahiri being the most open or moving away from the traditional Islamic doctrine. So this scenario was played in such a way that you have the Qudus that, although these guys knew what was going on, both Tahiri, Qudus, and Baha'u'llah, because they set up this scenario to introduce that for the Orthodox Bab'is that were still in the older religion and followers of the Tahiri, again to meet and then with the presence of Baha'u'llah and basically break the tradition of the past. So it's quite interesting where she actually walked into this group of scholars, and mostly Muslim scholars at the time, and without anything covering her face or her hands or her feet. So she was walking in there as an equal to men. And of course, this was such a shock to those Orthodox ecclesiastical that were still in the Islamic culture to see this. There was something happening. And of course, the Qudus was playing the role that I'm against this too, which they were part of the story anyways. So they knew actually what they were role playing to introduce this new religion. So here, I am the word which the Qa'im is to utter, the word which shall put to flight the chiefs and the nobles of the earth. So that means that the word of God has transformed and shows the true me that everybody can see. Tahiri is saying this. I am the word. So, and then she then turned her face toward Qudus and rebuked him for having failed to perform in Khorasan those things which she deemed essential to the welfare of the faith, which was really, so it's a power play regarding a progressive branch that was wanted to propagate this far and wide, and the conservative branch which we said no, we still have to be under cloak and basically keep it quiet and make sure we're safe. I am free to follow the promptings of my own conscience, reported Qudus. So now he's defending himself. I am not subject to the will and pleasure of my fellow disciples. Turning away her eyes from him, Tahiri invited those who were present to celebrate befittingly this great occasion. So this was the announcement that basically the old religion or old doctrine has died here. So this is new, and I am the manifestation of the Word of God. So turning away hearts from him. This day is the day of festivities and universal rejoicing. She added, the day on which the feathers of the past are burst asunder. That means they're gone. Let those who have shared in this great achievement arise and embrace each other. And of course, few people fled because they saw something happening was too much for them. A woman becoming the leader of the religion and telling them, look, and admonishing the followers and Qudus, which was a pillar of education, of Bab'i education, and it said, you didn't exercise my instructions in Khurasan. Of course, she herself was in jail at the time. So it's just quite interesting so that memorable day and those which immediately followed, it witnessed the most revolutionary changes in life and habits that assembled followers of the Bab. So this really showed that now they struck that basically line that from now on we're going to behave differently, we have a different agenda.
The prayers and ceremonials by which those devout worshippers had been disciplined were irrevocably discarded. A great confusion, however, prevailed among those who had so zealously arisen to advocate these reforms. A few condemned so radical a change as being the essence of heresy, and refused to annul what they regarded as the inviolable precepts of Islam. Some regarded Tahiri as the sole judge in such matters, and the only person qualified to claim implicit obedience from the faithful. Others, who denounced her behavior, held to Qudus, whom they regarded as the sole representative of the Bab, the only one who had the right to pronounce upon such weighty matters. Still others, who recognized the authority of both Tahiri and Qudus, viewed the whole episode as a God-sent test designed to separate the true from the false and distinguish the faithful from the disloyal. Tahiri herself ventured on a few occasions to repudiate the authority of Qudus. I deem him, she is reported to have declared, a pupil whom the Bab has sent me to edify and instruct. I regard him in no other light. Qudus did not fail on his part to denounce Tahiri as the author of heresy, and stigmatized those who advocated her views as the victims of error.
So now you see that the scenario is playing out. These guys are playing against each other to making sure that the followers of each group, the conservative branch and the progressive branch, now is the leaders are exchanging words and trying to come to a common groundwork, basically, common place. Go ahead.
This state of tension persisted for a few days until Baha'u'llah intervened and, in his masterly manner, effected a complete reconciliation between them. He healed the wounds which that sharp controversy had caused and directed his efforts of both along the path of constructive service. A footnote here says, it was this bold act of Qurrat al-Ain which shook the foundations of a literal belief in Islamic doctrines among the Persians. It may be added that the first fruits of Qurrat al-Ain's teaching was no one less than the heroic Qudus, and that the eloquent teacher herself owed her insight probably to Baha'u'llah. Of course, the supposition that her greatest friend might censure her is merely a delightful piece of irony. This is from Dr. T.K. Chain's The Reconciliation of Races and Religions, pages 103 to 4. The object of that memorable gathering had been attained. The clarion call of the new order had been sounded. The obsolete conventions which had fettered the consciences of men were boldly challenged and fearlessly swept away. The way was clear for the proclamation of the laws and precepts that were destined to usher in the new dispensation. The remnant of the companions who had gathered in BADASHT accordingly decided to depart for Mazindaran. Qudus and Tahiri seated themselves in the same howdah which had been prepared for their journey by Baha'u'llah. On their way, Tahiri each day composed an ode which she instructed those who accompanied her to chant as they followed her howdah. Mountain and valley re-echoed the shouts with which that enthusiastic band, as they journeyed to Mazindaran, hailed the extinction of the old and the birth of the new day. Baha'u'llah's sojourn in BADASHT lasted 22 days. In the course of their journey to Mazindaran, a few of the followers of the Bab sought to abuse the liberty which the repudiation of the laws and sanctions of an outgrown faith had conferred upon them. They viewed the unprecedented action of Tahiri in discarding the veil as a signal to transgress the bounds of moderation and to gratify their selfish desires. The excesses in which a few indulged provoked the wrath of the Almighty and caused their immediate dispersion. In the village of Ni Allah, they were grievously tested and suffered severe injuries at the hands of their enemies. This scattering extinguished the mischief which a few of the irresponsible among the adherents of the faith had sought to kindle, and preserved untarnished its honor and dignity. I have heard Baha'u'llah himself describe that incident. We were all gathered in the village of Ni Allah and were resting at the foot of a mountain when, at the hour of dawn, we were suddenly awakened by the stones which the people of the neighborhood were hurling upon us from the top of the mountain. The fierceness of their attack induced our companions to flee in terror and consternation. I clothed Qudus with my own garments and dispatched him to a place of safety where I intended to join him. When I had arrived, I found that he had gone. None of our companions had remained in Ni Allah except Tahiri and a young man from Shiraz, Mirza Abdullah. The violence with which we were assailed had brought desolation into our camp. I found no one into whose custody I could deliver Tahiri except that young man, who displayed on that occasion a courage and determination that were truly surprising. Sword in hand, undaunted by the savage assault of the inhabitants of the village who had rushed to plunder our property, he sprang forward to stay the hand of the assailants. Though himself wounded in several parts of his body, he risked his life to protect our property. I bade him desist from his act. When the tumult had subsided, I approached a number of the inhabitants of the village and was able to convince them of the cruelty and shamefulness of their behavior. Baha'u'llah, accompanied by Tahiri and her attendant, proceeded to Nur. He appointed Sheikh Abu Turab to watch over her and ensure her protection and safety. Meanwhile, the mischief-makers were endeavoring to kindle the anger of Muhammad Shah against Baha'u'llah, and, by representing him as the prime mover of the disturbances of Shahrud and Mazindaran, succeeded eventually in inducing the sovereign to have Baha'u'llah arrested. I have hitherto, the Shah is reported to have angrily remarked, refused to countenance whatever has been said against him. My indulgence has been actuated by my recognition of the services rendered to my country by his father. This time, however, I am determined to put him to death. He accordingly commanded one of his officers in Tehran to instruct his son, who was residing in Mazindaran, to arrest Baha'u'llah and to conduct him to the capital. The son of this officer received the communication on the very day preceding the reception which he had prepared to offer to Baha'u'llah, to whom he was devotedly attached. He was greatly distressed and did not divulge the news to anyone. Baha'u'llah, however, perceived his sadness and advised him to put his trust in God. The next day, as he was being accompanied by his friend to his home, they encountered a horseman who was coming from the direction of Tehran. "Muhammad Shah is dead," that friend exclaimed in the Mazindarani dialect as he hastened to rejoin him, Baha'u'llah, after a brief conversation with the messenger. He drew out the imperial summons and showed it to him. The document had lost its efficacy. That night was spent in the company of his guests in an atmosphere of undisturbed calm and gladness. Qudus had in the meantime fallen into the hands of his opponents and was confined in Sari, in the home of Mirza Muhammad Taqi, the leading mujtahid of that town. The rest of his companions, after their dispersal in Ni Allah, had scattered in different directions, each carrying with him to his fellow believers the news of the momentous happenings of BADASHT.
Okay, so this BADASHT, remember, this group that got together, they're composed of many different groups. Mostly they were sheikhs, but a lot of them were perceiving that this is really not a new religion. This 12th Imam is coming in to resurrect Islam. So the whole process was that there were completely misgivings or misconception between different groups that weren't even expecting a new religion or departure from the traditional Islamic culture generally. So what they were trying to do in this BADASHT, which they achieved, was to actually showing people that obviously the two groups, the progressive and then the orthodox branches, were admitting that this is a new religion. And the word of God, which Tahir mentioned, is that I am the product of this new religion. So the old doctrine and culture is terminated. So this really clearly shows that of course, many people joined this particular movement and they had their own ideas of what this is, or what the laws are, and why they're there. And the same thing, for example, happened with the Jews and Christians when Christ came in and said, look, this can't be a king because they're supposed to propagate Judaism, which wasn't the case. So this is really a question of announcing a new religion and then solidifying the position of this is actually a new religion. So whatever you know of your past religion, and the Tahir, which is the pure one, was really even changing the names of people, which was very interesting. So to show that they have a role now, and they have a position within this hierarchy, new hierarchy that was created. So it's really critical from that aspect to really understand how this movement was formed to bring into consensus of what actually this movement is.
Chapter 17, the Bab's incarceration in the castle of CHIHRÍQ. The incident of Ni'ala occurred in the middle of the month of Shaban in the year AH 1264, the 3rd of July to the 1st of August AD 1848. Towards the end of the same month, the Bab was brought to Tabriz, where he suffered at the hands of his oppressors a severe and humiliating injury. That deliberate affront to his dignity almost synchronized with the attack which the inhabitants of Ni'ala directed against Baha'u'llah and his companions. The one was pelted with stones by an ignorant and pugnacious people, the other was afflicted with stripes by a cruel and treacherous enemy. I shall now relate the circumstances that led to that odious indignity which the persecutors of the Bab chose to inflict upon him. He had, in pursuance of the orders issued by Haji Mirza Akhazi, been transferred to the castle of CHIHRÍQ and consigned to the keeping of Yahya Khan-i Kurd, whose sister was the wife of Muhammad Shah, the mother of the Naibuz Sultani. Strict and explicit instructions had been given by the Grand Vizier to Yahya Khan, enjoining him not to allow anyone to enter the presence of his prisoner. He was particularly warned not to follow the example of Ali Khan-i Markui, who had gradually been led to disregard the orders he had received. The footnote here says, the Bab was subjected to a closer and more rigorous confinement at CHIHRÍQ than he had been at Marku. Hence he used to call the former the grievous mountain, Jabal-i-Shadid, the numerical value of the word Shadid, 318, being the same as that of the name of CHIHRÍQ, and the latter the open mountain, Jabal-i-Basit, from a traveller's narrative, note L, page 276. Despite the emphatic character of that injunction, and in the face of the unyielding opposition of the all-powerful Haji Mirza Akazi, Yahya Khan found himself powerless to abide by those instructions. He too soon came to feel the fascination of his prisoner. He too forgot, as soon as he came into contact with his spirit, the duty he was expected to perform. At the very outset, the love of the Bab penetrated his heart and claimed his entire being. The Kurds who lived in CHIHRÍQ, and whose fanaticism and hatred of the Shias exceeded the aversion which the inhabitants of Maku entertained for that people, were likewise subjected to the transforming influence of the Bab.
Okay, so remember, these are Kurds. The Kurds are Sunnis. And of course, they think Shias are infidels. You know, they're abrogated laws of Quran, because they introduced anomalies even into their daily prayer. So they even changed the daily prayer. That's why these Kurds were quite against them. And of course, that was the outpost, the most remote outpost of the Persian Empire. And Kurds, which were ironically, to keep the peace, looks like the sister of Shah was married to the lord of the castle himself. So that's how they kept the politics going from that area. And of course, last time, so in this particular castle, again, the same thing happened when Mirza Aghasi, which was prime minister of the Shah, was trying to basically lay the ground for execution of the Bab and make him, harm comes to him. The lord of the castle fell into the love of Bab, and none of those atrocities occurred against him.
Such was the love he had kindled in their hearts, that every morning, ere they started for their daily work, they directed their steps towards his prison, and gazing from afar at the castle which contained his beloved self, invoked his name and besought his blessings. They would prostrate themselves on the ground and seek to refresh their souls with the remembrance of him. To one another they would freely relate the wonders of his power and glory, and would recount such dreams as bore witness to the creative power of his influence. To no one would Yahya Khan refuse admittance to the castle. As CHIHRÍQ itself was unable to accommodate the increasing number of visitors who flocked to its gates, they were enabled to obtain the necessary lodgings in Iski Shar, the old CHIHRÍQ, which was situated at an hour's distance from the castle. Whatever provisions were required for the Bab were purchased in the old town and transported to his prison. One day the Bab asked that some honey be purchased for him. The price at which it had been bought seemed to him exorbitant. He refused it and said, "Honey of a superior quality could no doubt have been purchased at a lower price. I, who am your example, have been a merchant by profession. It behoves you all in your transactions to follow my way. You must neither defraud your neighbor nor allow him to defraud you. Such was the way of your master. The shrewdest and ablest of men were unable to deceive him, nor did he on his part choose to act ungenerously towards the meanest and most helpless of creatures." He insisted that the attendant who had made that purchase should return and bring back to him a honey superior in quality and cheaper in price. During the Bab's captivity in the castle of CHIHRÍQ, events of a startling character caused grave perturbation to the government. It soon became evident that a number of the most eminent among the Sayyids, the Ulamas, and the government officials of Kui had espoused the cause of the prisoner and had completely identified themselves with his faith. Among them figured Mirza Muhammad Ali and his brother Buyuk Aka, both Sayyids of distinguished merit, who had risen with fevered earnestness to proclaim their faith to all sorts and conditions of people among their countrymen. A continuous stream of seekers and confirmed believers flowed back and forth as the result of such activities between Kui and CHIHRÍQ. It came to pass at that time that a prominent official of high literary ability, Mirza Asadullah, who was later surnamed Dayan by the Bab, and whose vehement denunciations of his message had baffled those who had endeavored to convert him, dreamed a dream. When he awoke, he determined not to recount it to anyone, and, fixing his choice on 2 verses of the Quran, he addressed the following request to the Bab. I have conceived 3 definite things in my mind. I request you to reveal to me their nature. Mirza Muhammad Ali was asked to submit this written request to the Bab. A few days later he received a reply, penned in the Bab's handwriting, in which he set forth in their entirety the circumstances of that dream, and revealed the exact texts of those verses. The accuracy of that reply brought about a sudden conversion. Though unused to walking, Mirza Asadullah hastened on foot along that steep and stony path which led from Qui to the castle. His friends tried to induce him to proceed on horseback to CHIHRÍQ, but he refused their offer. His meeting with the Bab confirmed him in his belief and excited that fiery ardor which he continued to manifest to the end of his life. That same year the Bab had expressed his desire that 40 of his companions should each undertake to compose a treatise and seek, by the aid of verses and traditions, to establish the validity of his mission. His wishes were instantly obeyed, and the result of their labors was duly submitted to his presence. Mirza Asadullah's treatise won the unqualified admiration of the Bab and ranked highest in his estimation. He bestowed on him the name Dayan and revealed in his honor the Law-i-Hurufat, which is literally the tablet of the letters, in which he made the following statement. Had the point of the Bayan, which is one of the titles of the Bab, had the point of the Bayan no other testimony with which to establish his truth, this were sufficient, that he revealed a tablet such as this, a tablet such as no amount of learning could produce. The people of the Bayan, who utterly misconceived the purpose underlying that tablet, thought it to be a mere exposition of the science of Jafar, which is the science of divination. When at a later time, in the early years of Baha'u'llah's incarceration in the prison city of Akka, Jinabi Mubaligh made from Shiraz his request that he unravel the mysteries of that tablet. There was revealed from his pen an explanation which they who misconceived the words of the Bab might do well to ponder. Baha'u'llah adduced from the statements of the Bab irrefutable evidence proving that the appearance of the Manyushiruhullah, which is reference to Baha'u'llah, must needs occur no less than 19 years after the declaration of the Bab. The mystery of the Mustagath had long baffled the most searching minds among the people of the Bayan, and had proved an unsurmountable obstacle to their recognition of the Promised One. The Bab had himself, in that tablet, unraveled that mystery. No one, however, was able to understand the explanation which he had given. It was left to Baha'u'llah to unveil it to the eyes of all men. The untiring zeal which Mirza Asadullah displayed induced his father, who was an intimate friend of Haji Mirza Akazi, to report to him the circumstances which led to the conversion of his son, and to inform him of his negligence in carrying out the duties which the state had imposed upon him. He expatiated upon the eagerness with which so able a servant of the government had risen to serve his new master, and the success which had attended his efforts. A further cause for apprehension on the part of the government authorities was supplied by the arrival at CHIHRÍQ of a dervish who had come from India, and who, as soon as he met the Bab, acknowledged the truth of his mission. All who met that dervish, whom the Bab had named Karula, during his sojourn at Iskishar, felt the warmth of his enthusiasm and were deeply impressed by the tenacity of his conviction. An increasing number of people became enamored of the charm of his personality and willingly acknowledged the compelling power of his faith. Such was the influence which he exercised over them that a few among the believers were inclined to regard him as an exponent of divine revelation, although he altogether disclaimed such pretensions. He was often heard to relate the following. In the days when I occupied the exalted position of a Nawab in India, the Bab appeared to me in a vision. He gazed at me and won my heart completely. I rose and had started to follow him, when he looked at me intently and said, "Divest yourself of your gorgeous attire, depart from your native land, and hasten on foot to meet me in Azerbaijan. In CHIHRÍQ you will attain your heart's desire. I followed his directions and have now reached my goal. The news of the turmoil which that lowly dervish had been able to raise among the Kurdish leaders in CHIHRÍQ reached Tabriz and was thence communicated to Tehran. No sooner had the news reached the capital than orders were issued to transfer the Bab immediately to Tabriz, in the hope of allaying the excitement which his continued residence in that locality had provoked. Before the news of this fresh order had reached CHIHRÍQ, the Bab had charged Azim to inform Karula of his desire that he return to India and there consecrate his life to the service of the cause. Alone and on foot, he commanded him, he should return whence he came. With the same ardour and detachment with which he performed his pilgrimage to this country, he must now repair to his native land and unceasingly labour to advance the interests of the cause. He also bade him instruct Mirza Abdul Wahab-i Turshizi, who was living in Kui, to proceed immediately to Urumiyeh, where he said he would soon join him. Azim himself was directed to leave for Tabriz, and there informed Syed Ibrahim-i Khalil of his approaching arrival at that city. Tell him, the Bab added, that the fire of Nimrod will shortly be kindled in Tabriz, but despite the intensity of its flame, no harm will befall our friends.
So this story really shows several components that plays into the concept in Baha'i religion, which Abdul Baha describes, the spiritual world and communication of spirit in general. It's attached to this world. So it's, if you look at this dimension, the 3 dimension of physical reality, the assumption is that the world of spirit is another dimension of the same reality. So the same way that, and you see the visions that comes to someone in India, for example. So it was quite interesting from a point of view of closeness of spirit. The distance has no implication. The same way that he was communicating or bringing people to his fold anytime he was interacting with them. In several times that they put him in jail. So the key really goes back of this essence of communication, of spirit, where the distance or position or material means or even education has no consequences. So he could really attract people even from far away from India. They would come and visit him. So this is really the whole concept that the spiritual world is with us here. And this is when someone passes on, Baha'is believe that is actually released from this cage. They go to a dimension which is really encompasses this dimension. So this is really quite interesting, and you see the references in this methodology within the Baha'i writings of how these events would occur. So questions of is the influence of metaphysics, which is really in people's memory, in people's feelings, which is not measurable electrically, although electrically you can measure it too. But how could this physically dissipate? The only way it dissipates is when you're in another dimension. For example, if you look at, let's say, two-dimensional plane, right? There are two people running here, and they're actually moving away from each other, right? And the only thing they see is the other guy is moving away from each other. And you know that me that is sitting in the third dimension, I can see actually both of them, what they're doing. But they can't really detect what is happening to them. And I know if they go far away from this book, they're going to fall off. They can't tell that because they're in two-dimensional matter. Now, if I put my finger right in the middle of it, right, they only see a point. They can't see the whole thing. So this situation regarding a spiritual connection, if your spirit is accessing those people's spirit, you don't have to be near them. You have the influence on them, regardless of where they are. So it's quite interesting and say, how could, for example, God be everywhere? Because physically it's difficult for us to comprehend this, right? Or how could you have universe so large? Actually, something of universe being everywhere. And Abdul Baha many years ago, by the way, my background is physics and applied mathematics, were saying is that there is no pure actually vacuum. There is no place in the universe that there is nothing. You know, up to about 15 years ago, that was the belief, right? That the universe is actually completely devoid of matter, and because they couldn't detect it. They couldn't detect it, so there's nothing there. Now, about 10, 15 years ago, I don't know exactly the date, they found quarks, which is a subatomic particle. And then they went down the Earth. So they're saying, well, these quarks may be influence of the Big Bang theory, and it's all over the place. So let's go and go 2,000 feet inside the Earth. So there is no influence of the celestial atomic bombardment of the Earth because it's so far down and nothing can penetrate from too far. And ironically, they found quarks there. So the key really is that this process of not having a vacuum, not having a place that there is nothing in it. This shows that you can be everywhere. So it's very, very interesting from this concept. From a material point of view, we may not believe in dreams, for example. And here it actually shows that Baha'u'llah mentioned actually a dream is an example, or same way that you say you're from a different dimension, you see a shadow of one dimension of the finger that is put inside. So the dream is the same way. It's a reality that it's far bigger, and we only see one dimension of it, the shadow of it here on Earth. So that's why people get convinced by dreams, and they follow and try to figure out where this ideology is taking them. So this issue of the original founders or original followers of the Bab, many of them got attracted to the religion because of these dreams that they were encountering. So this power of the spirit of the Bab was so pervading this dimension that anyone that was coming in contact to him would believe in his movement.
No sooner had Karula received the message from his master than he arose to carry out his wishes. To anyone who wished to accompany him, he would say, "You can never endure the trials of this journey. Abandon the thought of coming with me. You would surely perish on your way, inasmuch as the Bab has commanded me to return alone to my native land." The compelling force of his reply silenced those who begged to be allowed to journey with him. He refused to accept either money or clothing from anyone. Alone, clad in the meanest attire, staff in hand, he walked all the way back to his country. No one knows what ultimately befell him. Muhammad Ali Zunuzi, surnamed Anis, was among those who heard of the message from the Bab in Tabriz and was fired with the desire to hasten to CHIHRÍQ and attain his presence. Those words had kindled in him an irrepressible longing to sacrifice himself in his path. Sayyid Ali Zunuzi, his stepfather, a notable of Tabriz, strenuously objected to his leaving the city and was at last induced to confine him in his house and strictly watch over him. His son languished in his confinement until the time when his beloved had reached Tabriz and had been taken back again to his prison in CHIHRÍQ. I have heard Sheikh Hassan Zunuzi relate the following. At about the same time that the Bab dismissed Azim from his presence, I was instructed by him to collect all the available tablets that he had revealed during his incarceration in the castles of Maku and CHIHRÍQ, and to deliver them into the hands of Sayyid Ibrahim-i Khalil, who was then living in Tabriz, and urge him to conceal and preserve them with the utmost care. During my stay in that city, I often visited Sayyid Ali Zunuzi, who was related to me, and frequently heard him deplore the sad fate of his son. "He seems to have lost his reason," he bitterly complained. "He has, by his behavior, brought reproach and shame upon me. Try to calm the agitation of his heart and induce him to conceal his convictions." Every day I visited him. I witnessed the tears that continually rained from his eyes. After the Bab had departed from Tabriz, one day as I went to see him, I was surprised to note the joy and gladness which illumined his countenance. His handsome face was wreathed in smiles as he stepped forward to receive me. "The eyes of my beloved," he said as he embraced me, "have beheld this face, and these eyes have gazed upon his countenance. Let me," he added, "tell you the secret of my happiness. After the Bab had been taken back to CHIHRÍQ, one day, as I lay confined in my cell, I turned my heart to him and besought him in these words: 'Thou beholdest, O my best beloved, my captivity and helplessness, and knowest how eagerly I yearn to look upon thy face. Dispel the gloom that oppresses my heart with the light of thy countenance.' What tears of agonizing pain I shed that hour! I was so overcome with emotion that I seemed to have lost consciousness. Suddenly I heard the voice of the Bab, and lo, he was calling me. He bade me arise. I beheld the majesty of his countenance as he appeared before me. He smiled as he looked into my eyes. I rushed forward and flung myself at his feet. 'Rejoice,' he said, 'the hour is approaching when, in this very city, I shall be suspended before the eyes of the multitude, and shall fall a victim to the fire of the enemy. I shall choose no one except you to share with me the cup of martyrdom. Rest assured that this promise which I give you shall be fulfilled.' I was entranced by the beauty of that vision. When I recovered, I found myself immersed in an ocean of joy, a joy the radiance of which all the sorrows of the world could never obscure. That voice keeps ringing in my ears. That vision haunts me both in the daytime and in the night season. The memory of that ineffable smile has dissipated the loneliness of my confinement. I am firmly convinced that the hour at which his pledge is to be fulfilled can no longer be delayed." I exhorted him to be patient and to conceal his emotions. He promised me not to divulge that secret, and undertook to exercise the utmost forbearance towards Sayyid Ali. I hastened to assure the father of his determination, and succeeded in obtaining his release from his confinement. That youth continued until the day of his martyrdom to associate, in a state of complete serenity and joy, with his parents and kinsmen. Such was his behavior towards his friends and relatives that, on the day he laid down his life for his beloved, the people of Tabriz all wept and bewailed him.